After hundreds of work hours, numerous meetings, and probably several moments of anguish, your draft EIS is completed. Hopefully much of the heavy lifting is done at this point, but there are several more tasks to complete before celebrating. The next milestone is to produce the final EIS. Here is how we get to that point. There is a prescribed process for moving from the draft to the final EIS. The first step is described in Section 1503.1 of the CEQ regulations. To ensure that the draft EIS is thoroughly vetted, there will be a comment period in which comments from other agencies and the public are accepted by the authorizing agency. CEQ regulations state that any federal agency which has jurisdiction by law or special expertise with respect to any environmental impact involved, or which is authorized to develop and enforce environmental standards, has a duty to respond. That is why this part of the regulation says the comments shall be obtained. Other comments are requested, which signifies that the responses from these sources are not mandatory. This group includes appropriate state and local agencies, Indian tribes, any agency which has requested that it receive statements on the EIS process, the applicant, and of course the public. Agencies and the public that choose to comment can address the merits of the EIS or comment on its adequacy. If they are critical, these entities should provide alternatives to the problems they perceive. Lacking this level of detail, these comments may not be addressed in the final EIS, as it is hard to make changes if the commenter does not offer an alternative. Those agencies that are required to respond are expected to provide more detailed information, especially if they object to part of the EIS. And it is important to note that any agency can simply state they have no comments and thereby meet the response criteria. When the comment period begins, agencies and the public are given a deadline for responding. Most agencies will accept comments after the deadline and will consider them because they have a strong desire to be as inclusive as possible. The lead agency will process the comments and, if there's a large volume, will sort them into types based on the topic addressed. The project team will consider the information received and proceed to make changes to the EIS that they feel are warranted. Comments from agencies that are required to respond will be addressed in the final EIS. Comments from agencies not required to respond and the public will also be addressed. However, they may or may not be incorporated into the EIS. When the project team is done, they will prepare and publish the final EIS, unless the project is controversial, in which case they may accept additional comments on the FEIS. Agencies required to respond may take a stand and object to one or more parts of an EIS. When this occurs, the staff from the agencies involved in the disagreement will try to resolve their differences before the DEIS is issued. Usually, this is successful. However, should an impasse arise, once the FEIS is issued, the matter is referred to the CEQ for resolution. The last step in the EIS process is publishing the Record of Decision. The ROD states the decision, specifies all alternatives considered and identifies the lead agency's preferred alternative, confirms the preferred alternative minimizes environmental harm, and, if impacts are unavoidable, describes the monitoring and enforcement measures for the mitigation. The ROD is not intended to be a lengthy document. CEQ recommends it be no more than 10 pages. Once completed and approved for release, it is published in the Federal Register. To recap the major points of issuing an EIS. The process begins with a comment period on the draft EIS. The lead agency processes the comments received and issues a final EIS that includes, at a minimum, specific responses to the agencies obligated to respond. Following this, a record of decision is written and published in the Federal Register.